Thank you all for being here. Welcome to another Artist Outlook video installment in the ongoing series. I'm Patricia Tomlinson, and I'm curator of the Appleton Museum of Art. And tonight we are very excited to have David Williams with us. We are fortunate enough at the Appleton to have 3 pieces by him, which incidentally are currently on view. So you can come to the Appleton and look at those in person because art is always more fun in person. But I want to thank David and let him introduce himself. So David, could you please say a little bit about yourself to everyone?
Yes, thank you very much to everyone from taking time out of your busy lives to sit down with us for a little while today. I'm really honored to be able to speak to you and talk to you about my work. My name is David Williams, and I'm a painter and part-time printmaker, it seems these days. Lives in St. Petersburg, Florida. I've been here in St. Petersburg about 33 years, and I've been practicing my fine art career for about 25. I've also got another career that plays into what I do, I make sort of post-pop modernist paintings taken from images I remember from childhood and in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
That's marvelous. And that's one of the things I'm going to ask you about as we progress through this, sort of your aesthetic and kind of what makes you tick. But I kind of wanted to start broadly in the beginning and just ask you about some of your influences. Is there a particular painting or is there a particular person that was sort of a big influence on you?
I think earlier in my career, and by I mean earlier, as a child, I always drew and always painted, but I was always attracted to Mad Magazine, Cracked Magazine, and illustrations in magazines. This was a time before photography really took over the magazine industry. So you could always find these wonderful illustrators. But I think one of my first artistic influences was Edward Hopper. I just loved the way he captured the psyche of a moment and the atmosphere and the mystery about it. What I always liked was the way it was left up to interpretation. And I like to think I have some of that in my paintings, is that you approach it with your own set of ideas and thoughts, and you might read into it differently than someone else. So then later, it was, of course, the pop artist, the Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, Rosenquist, all of those guys into Basquiat and Keith Haring. So David Saulé. I'm also a David Saulé. Some people pronounce it Saul, but I love his work and follow it. He's still a practicing artist. Follow it to this day.
That's wonderful. So your Hopper reference has intrigued me. Did you start when you began your art explorations and as a young person, did you go into more of a Hopper-esque vein at first, or talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, I would have liked to have tried to. I got an early art education from a private art instructor in this little small town in Eastern Kentucky. And he taught oil painting classes, and he did children's classes and he did adult classes in the basement of his home. And he and his wife traveled during the summer. They were both school teachers and a principal. And then when they would come home, they would bring postcards of their travels, and we would paint those under his tutelage. So while I was trying to copy, he was always about copying the image as faithfully as possible. I was still trying to put that Hopper-esque spin on it. All of a sudden in the middle of the forest, there might appear this figure that wasn't there, but I was like going, you're gonna want to know why that figure's there. So yeah, that's sort of how I try to incorporate, his idea and his aesthetic into my work.
Okay, that explains a lot. That's very wonderful. So let's talk a little bit about the influences on your current work. obviously there's a lot of nostalgia involved. You and I are roughly the same age, and so I appreciate, and I'm also nostalgic about several of your references. I called it this, and I don't mean it derogatorily at all. The Howard Johnson kind of phenomena,
Yes.
because that was such a big thing when we were kids. So can you talk a little bit about that nostalgia that's sort of naturally built into your work?
Well, and I think at childhood, I was surrounded, I had grandparents that kept all of these magazines, mechanics magazines, popular mechanics, Women's Day. So there were a lot of these images that I would keep seeing. I always loved these black and white images in the back of these comics. As I got older and started reflecting on an art career, or a painting career, these images sort of came back to me as a touchstone. And I knew, though I didn't originally start out doing the type of paintings I do now, when I originally got to this point, I was sort of looking at my paintings as an archaeological dig. And what I wanted to do was have layer upon layer and image upon image. And it was sort of like when you find a dinosaur skeleton at the first time. You might find an arm bone first, and then you find a bit of the tail, and then you find a bit of the head. And it's not until you find the majority of the pieces that you can kind of put the story together. And that's how I sort of took these nostalgic images and combined them together to sort of tell a story that I wanted to tell.
Okay, so essentially what your art, tell me if I'm right. What I'm hearing is what your art means to you is it's basically a form of storytelling. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. In my other career, as a journalist, I was a visual storyteller. And I've always been, wanting to tell a story. And where a lot of my art, when people first say it, they immediately go to the pop art vein. It's not the pop art of the 60s, which was about, the economy, about consumer, production, or consumer, consuming, or about a war, or about politics. I use the pop art aesthetic to sort of tell my personal stories, things that I've experienced, things that I've seen. So my pop art is autobiographical.
Okay, okay. That makes a lot of sense. So let's maybe look at your work, because it's fun to look at it while we're speaking about it. So let me get this up. Okay, so now I did put these up chronologically, because I think it's also really interesting to see the progression of an artist's work and thought process through time. So this is one of your earlier pieces out there. Would you like to tell everyone a little bit about this, please?
Sure. Shortly after, seriously getting into a painting career, I was doing one-off paintings. It was just sort of take an idea, run with it, and be done, and then take another idea and run with it. I then found the notion of working in a series. And I would do 10 to 12 paintings in a series, then sort of say, maybe I've reached the conclusion of it, but I would take an idea or an image from that and move it forward to the next series. This particular series was called Distillation. And this is after I had done several years of paintings where I had primarily used, like you see here, simple line drawings, heavily painted backgrounds. And in this series, there were 20 paintings, and each one got a little bit more painted over, or got a little bit more distilled, until the last painting was almost absolutely white. That being said, this particular painting out there, at this time in my life and everything, I was becoming a first-time home buyer. So the idea of just springing, free into the air and, grabbing that first home was a little bit exhilarating to me. So trying to kind of combine the images to tell that story.
That's wonderful. And I want everyone to pay attention to this female figure. and the lines, because you're going to see this again and even later when we get into the pieces that the Appleton owns. So please everyone, keep that little line drawing nugget in the back of your mind as we progress, please. So let's go. And one of the things I think is really interesting too in your early works, it's your aesthetic became more, I don't want to use the word flamboyant, but your images are much more complex as we progress through time. This is really, for my knowledge of you, this is really quite simple.
Yeah, and I think a part of it was at this time, maybe I didn't feel as secure in my painting technique as I do now. And having you say that, it's kind of funny because the way I paint now is very controlled and very tight. There's some painterly passages in there, but it is very designed and very tightly painted. And I look back at this piece now and I see where I'm going next. We'll talk about later, but I could kind of say, maybe I'm not going in a new direction, but I've kind of gone full circle.
Mm-hmm. That's cool. Yeah, let's keep that little nugget for a moment or two here. So this is Any Way the Wind Blows. And incidentally, I really love your titles. Of course, having to do with songs, popular culture, common sayings, idioms. So I think that's really fun too.
It's interesting that you caught the song title. It was every painting in this Distillation show had a song title. This is going to sound weird, but it had a song title that was based on the title of the song or part of a lyric song from a Joe Walsh album called But Seriously, Folks.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic. Oh, yeah.
It was something I was listening to heavily. He tells a great story, very simply. And these paintings were part of that listening process. So, and this was the idea too. This was a time in my life where, I didn't have a lot of restrictions. I had no painting restrictions, galleries demanding work or demand for sales or anything like that. So I was free to blow any way the wind blows. I could paint in the direction that I wanted to go.
Wonderful. And I love you've got this interesting, diagram of a bird too. I think because then you don't see that one as much in your work. So can you talk about where you got the bird breakdown?
The bird is from a series of field guides. They were actually part of a Golden Book series from back in my childhood, and it would be the Golden Book to plants, a Golden Book to butterflies and moths, the Golden Book of Birds of North America. So, and they had these beautiful, simple line drawings in them. At the time, too, I used to scour old thrift stores and bookstores here in St. Petersburg. And I had just found a salesman's sampler booklet of vintage wallpaper. So the background that you see there is just, an example of some of the vintage wallpaper. And then another item that we'll see pop up in a piece that the Appleton owns is the text in the upper left. I used text at this time in a variety of ways to actually be read and sometimes just as a graphic element.
Okay. Okay, terrific. So let's look at the next one. Now, this is a good place to start talking about your series and why you do series, because as we progress through, you have several different series that you have gone through over the years. You want to talk to us a little bit about why you do that and what that means to you?
Yeah, this was a series that I had started. I had just finished a series and I was sort of saying, okay, what do I want to do next? I want to keep exploring. I want to keep growing, but I don't want to keep doing the same thing again. And I had just started some conversations with an organization in Japan about doing a cultural exchange product. So I was exploring Japanese culture and such. And a thought that I had been thinking about for a while is, Greek tragedy. And Greek tragedy is Greek tragedy because it's set in Greece. I was like, well, what if those stories weren't set in Greece? What if those were set in my backyard? What if they happened, at 57th Avenue South in St. Petersburg, Florida? And what if it wasn't traditional Greek beauty, but it was, Japanese characters and such. And so I started exploring imagery, and I started exploring, Greek tragic stories. And in this particular case, this is called Sirens, 57th Street South, which is my neighborhood. And so this depicts the sirens as they are portrayed in the Greek tragedy. So you have the beautiful maiden, smiling, singing, and trying to lure the sailors into their death, along the rocks. And there's a little snapshot of the water in a park down the street from us. So it sets it in my neighborhood. So that's where the idea for this series started from. And then I advanced by, doing Icarus and other characters from Greek tragedy, using this kind of iconography.
Very interesting. And now I think this might be a good place to, correct me if I'm wrong, to start talking about how you map out. You said you're very exacting when you do the canvases. Is this a good example of that? Because it seems like it might be.
This would have been done at the time, as a lot of older artists will remember, before Photoshop, before we all had computers and we were able to do anything. I basically had a piece of map board, and I would cut it into the dimension, the proportion of the canvas that I wanted to work on. And then I would take the actual images that I had found, and I would bend them and fold them and then layer them underneath the whole and move them around and get them into a design or into a format that I thought, that's it. And then I would tape the edges of that and then tape the back of it. And then that would become like the maquette or the sketch that I would then work from.
Oh,
and so in a lot of the reference, that if you go through my reference sheets these days, you'll just see multiple folds, as I might have used an image 4 or 5 times in different paintings, but I used a different portion of it. So it would have been folded a little bit differently. Currently, I find myself cheating a little bit and using Photoshop every once in a while.
Well, that's really fascinating that you literally laid them out and did it. Because I mean, nowadays, when we think of something like that, where you actually are, quote, pasting images, we think of inspiration boards and those types of things, not really as a valid way to make art per se.
Yes. And then I think a part of it is my background in graphic design. I was able to play into, making these things the size I wanted to, the space that I wanted to, but still tell the story. It was all important about telling the story. So if an image didn't work in the shape that I had prescribed for it, I would just go through my reference and find something that might work better. Like the smiling Japanese girl. I might have used 2 or 3 others in there before I found the one that I thought conveyed the idea of sirens, best.
Okay, that's terrific. Let's move to the next one. Now, one of the things that I'm hoping the visitors who are all watching us are noticing, you've done a lot on canvas, but this is on paper. So you work in that medium too.
Yes, the works on paper, I usually start with those. And I usually tear them. You'll see that I work in a very similar format throughout, either the rectangle or the square. And a sheet of watercolor paper at 22 by 30 inches is basically that same proportions. So I found that working on paper, I wasn't as timid or as tight when I was painting it, because I was treating them more as preparatory sketches. It was a way, again, this was before I was using Photoshop or anything. It was a way for me to try out an idea in sketch form before I would take it up and take the months that I might work on it in a 5 by 6 painting or something like that. So this is from that series. This is from the Greek series. that I kind of started and stopped, several times. But this would have been almost a preparatory sketch, Greek study, number 4 that was done for this series.
That's really interesting because I very much like it in its own right too. I mean, you almost sound like you're using it as a litmus test, if you will, but I think this is very good and very valid work as well.
Oh, well, thank you. I used to, and I think the reason that I started doing them more than just a quick sketch that a lot of artists would do is that in the late 90s, I found, or I had the opportunity to learn monotypes. And so I became fascinated with paper and the monotype process. And so I was just always buying lots of paper. So I had lots of paper around. So then it became like a good medium for me to try to scale up the paintings and see if they were going to work in a larger format than the sketch that I had, the collage kind of sketch. So
okay.
So they weren't truly meant solely as work product. It's just that I've never exhibited them as a coherent body of work.
Well, I think you should. So let's look. Really like this one because I have heard it being in the art world for a very long time. I have heard so many people say I like what I like, and their hands are usually folded in the exact same way. So can you tell us about this piece?
That's exactly it. The series was called Lookers. And it was basically, each title is based on something I had heard, in my career said about, one of my pieces. And, some are good, some are slapstick, some are straightforward, like this little girl saying, I like what I like. Now, it doesn't mean she likes it or she doesn't like it. I don't know, but she just said she likes what she likes. Imagery wise, I had found in an old, junk store, they're getting fewer and farther in between, but a huge pile of dress patterns that were in these envelopes, and the illustrations that were on the front were just amazing. And it would show the 2 or 3 different dresses or pants or whatever you could make from this one pattern. And so that was my main influence because they always showed the characters doing something, they were either drinking or engaging with something because you wanted to see the clothes in action. So this was sort of, taken from that. They are the lookers. It's almost like they are standing in front of the painting that is the background of this piece. So it's almost a painting within a painting.
Interesting, very clever. I like it. And I think this is a good example of to show the archaeological dig-like layer upon layer technique that you were mentioning.
Yeah, I mean, because and some of it means something to me, and some of it might mean something else to someone else. There's the Japanese calligraphy that's always has become more and more important to me. But a lot of times, it's like they say, it's Greek to me. I can't read it. I've attempted to learn it several times, but still, to me, it's just a great visual graphic image. In the background of her is an old cereal from the 60s. It was just called Frostios. And I just love the color and the bold graphic design of the text itself. You don't have to read it. You don't have to know that it's a cereal box. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing I want. I don't want the images at this point anyway, to be so in your face that that's all you see. I almost want you to look layer into layer into layer and then put it all together. And I had one collector say to me that they always liked my work because they said they could come back to it and they might see something they've never seen before, or they might be in a different frame of mind and read the painting differently.
I can see that. I completely understand what you're saying because I would think I tend to focus right here on these fun shiny cherries, and then I kind of bounce over to her because I get that red reference going on, and then I start bouncing around the rest of it. So I think on any given day, you might go to the blue first because it's a gorgeous turquoise. You're right. So I think that is very interesting that you said that. Let's look at another piece. So here is another work on paper. And once again, a very fun title. You tend to really have fun with your titles. And whenever I think of this, I think of a series that I was watching on PBS, Wolf Hall, where Henry VIII is trying to get everybody to vote his way on the divorce from Catherine of Aragon, and they talk about the eyes having it. Of course, it's not literally a human eye.
But no, it's funny you mentioned the blue, the aqua color in the last piece. That's my Williams teal. I use it in almost every painting. I don't know why, but it seems to creep into the painting. The next thing I know, I'm like, oh, I'm getting the big bucket of Williams teal out again. So it must mean I have to use it. But this is another work on paper. It's a more recent work, and it sort of chronicles some of the work that I'm currently doing. In that if you remember the Sirens piece, it was very tightly designed. It was like every piece had its own little section that it occupied, and there was a little bit of breakthrough. And I think what I'm trying to do in this most recent series is go beyond that. And it's like break those planes down a little bit more. I'm also moved on a little bit from the Japanese calligraphy more so to graffiti tags. And to me, it's just an expressive, dynamic visual, and that's why I sort of always use them on the edge of the paintings, just because it leaves you wanting to read it. And I'm not meaning for you to read it. I'm meaning for it to be a visual clue in this piece somehow.
Yeah, and this is delicious. This wonderful enigmatic arrow tail with the fun curvature of the other lettering.
And in the background, the cherries and the flowers again, that's from that wallpaper sampler.
Okay. Very fun. And I'm very fond of this piece. It's one of your newer pieces. So let's talk about this one a little, please.
Yeah, this is the new series I started, and I started it, I think probably pre-COVID. This is the first in the series, and the series is just called the Field Guide. And if it harkens back a little bit to the bird diagrams that you saw, and it also harkens back to that series that I did called Distillation, where I was sort of trying to paint out imagery and things I had done before, so that I could start afresh. Well, I think it's what I'm doing again, because these are field guides to me. I don't know how many volumes there will be. I'm up to 5 at this point. But what I'm doing is I'm taking images that I've used before. So you'll be able to find these in other paintings, but I'm recombining them, and I'm sort of trying to tell, the story of me, a story of my path through the images that I've used before. And then when I get done and move on to the next series, the way I'm progressing, it might not include any of this nostalgia at all. And I will have worked that through my system, but that's part of the fun of using the series, is that, you take that next thing and you run with it. And what I might do in the next series is something that's more abstract than the nostalgia sort of, images.
Wonderful. So hold that thought. So, and we'll return to that. But I love this one because to me it's just very Florida. It's the pretty girl in Miami all dolled up. Of course, the oranges. It's, to me, this is a very Florida image. It's fun. So let's look at this one, another wonderful one. Would you like to talk about this one?
Yeah, this is the 4th in the series. And again, that it's all imagery that I've used before, but I'm trying to take it and combine it in a new way. And again, all these paintings are autobiographical. They're not only just images that I've used, but I try to tell stories or try to tell a little something about myself. And in this particular case, this would be, anytime, I've never said this out loud, but this would be a portrait of my wife. She is the queen. She is the queen bee. And I am just head over heels in love with her. So the boy, oh boy, popcorn bag is upside down. There's the image of the queen and she's in close proximity to the bee. So that's a kind of an easy giveaway. But then there's the, kind of Chinese graffiti that you have no idea what it says. But, it's like an open question. And once again, it's like a language, you're hearing a language you can't understand. And in this case, it's her. Sometimes I can't figure her out.
So you just gave me the perfect segue into something that I've been thinking about going through your images with you as well. Are you familiar with the term Easter eggs? For example, in movies, yes, they'll put like sly little, do you do that on purpose? Because I see a lot of, maybe it's just me, but I see a lot of Easter eggs, little cute, little subtle, sly things in your work.
I want to be Jackson Pollock and say, I deny the accident, but no, I do some intentional Easter eggs. And then I do some things too that, and it's just part of being, an artist. I paint some things knowing that I'm going to completely cover them up and think, because I know that if the light hits it one way, that you can see it. You can see the paint underneath the paint. So no, and that plays into the archaeological dig again. I sort of hide some things in there, a few Easter eggs, and then there's some underpainting that goes on that, maybe one day if they have to restore a piece of mine, they'll find a hidden Picasso under there.
Wow, cool. Wonderful. So let's go to the pieces that the Appleton owns. And once again, for those of you who may have come a little late, the next three pieces you see are all owned by the Appleton Museum of Art, and they are currently on view. So we encourage you all to come and see in person, because that is very fun. Now, this piece is beloved by most of our young visitors. They are mad about this piece. Would you like to talk about it?
And I know exactly why it is. It's the monkey image. They think it's so iconic. They think it's Curious George. They think they've seen it in everything. But I will tell you so that you know and you can pass on the real story. But this piece is called Fun and Games, but the series was actually called Fun and Games. And it was about a point in my career where I was finding out that the art game wasn't all fun and games. It's a lot of hard work. It's a lot of the things that people don't think about, contacting galleries, or having galleries, turn you down or disappoint you, or disappointing sales from a gallery. It's all of the backstory that is not so fun. In this particular case, when I found the monkey image, I instantly thought of myself, and it became my self-portrait. So anytime you see the monkey, it's basically me in the story. And the monkey image was in an old magic catalog from the late 50s, where they were trying to sell cheap tricks to kids, the two rings together or the rope through the rope and all of this. And so they had two characters that talked you through all the products. One was the magician with the top hat and the wand, and one was his sidekick, Victor the monkey. And so I shortened it, or a friend of mine shortened it. He thought I was saying victim monkey. And when I told him that it was me, he was like, "So you're victim monkey?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I guess in a way I am." So this particular painting is, fun and games. And of course, it's just the opposite, that it's not all fun and games. But you see the old bowling bags there alluding to games and playing. In the red background, if you look at it, it's tough to see in reproduction sometimes, but if you actually see the paste, it's a diagram of different skiing techniques. So there's outdoor sports, there's all of this. There's the little swatch up in the upper left-hand corner of, a tropical, Hawaiian pattern. I love those. I love those shirts. I love that pattern. Simple or multicolored, I love them. I left the blue painter's tape around it. Usually I would have pulled that off, but I left that to give the essence that the painting was still in progress, that it wasn't finished. For some reason, it's been taken off the easel before it was intended to. And then that leads us to the left-hand portion of the painting, which includes the text that I had mentioned earlier on the Any Way the Wind Blows painting. And a lot of people don't read it. They just see it as a color field and some text and they move on. But it's from an old first aid manual, and it talks about how to treat a head wound and what you need to do, the steps to save someone from a traumatic injury. And so I thought there was this clever dialogue between the cuteness of the monkey, the seriousness of the text that sort of painted and lost into the background. And it all just sort of tied together into this idea that there were pitfalls in the creation of art, and that it all wasn't fun and games.
Wow, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's great for us. We're going to pass that on to all our visitors. So, and it's just such a, it's also a relatively large piece. If everyone's noticing, it's 50 by 70. So it's very commanding because it's also very bright. Your monitors are not off. This is a very bright piece. So it really commands attention, which is part of its charm.
Yeah, I don't shy away from the bright colors, though.
So let's look at the next one in our collection. And I really love this piece. And I'm going to tell the visitors what I told you. I know the name of it is 17860. However, I unofficially refer to it as Daredevil because you cannot miss that bright yellow Daredevil text. So it's got a subtitle in my head.
Yeah, it was when you sent this image to me, it was like seeing an old friend. It's someone I've not seen in 15, 20 years possibly. But this was a painting that happened at a very decisive moment in my life painting wise. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. But this particular piece is called 17860. Because that is my birth date. And I painted this on my 35th birthday. So at this time, the imagery was a lot more in your face. If you remember, there was a game show back in the 60s and I think into the 70s that was called Concentration. And you basically had to solve a picture puzzle. And the answer might be My Valentine, but it would have like a bumblebee for the bee, and they'd have a mine, a gold mine for the bee, my part of it. Well, this painting very much plays off that idea. So the imagery you have in there is the happy, drinking, celebrating guy. Of course, that's me. And you'll see the diagram of the fingers. They're basically counting, and the hands that are highlighted are basically counting out to 35. 35 was a milestone for me. For some reason, I thought everything was going downhill from 35. So I was out to make this thing, a splash. The Daredevil imagery is from one of my favorite comic books as a child. And I've always been quite the Daredevil, skydive, whitewater rafting, adventure travels. But then what caught me about this particular piece was the man without fear, but the text that's underneath it is electro. And that has a special connection for me because my family, my grandfather, my father, all my uncles, my brother are all electricians. So this was sort of like the family I came from. And then lastly, you see the girl with the beach ball upside down. That was my wife at the time. And I don't think she understood why I was taking away from a career in journalism, because I was doing a lot of teaching, a lot of lecturing about this new visual journalism that was going on, that USA Today had introduced. And I just said, I'm going to stop that because I forgot about this urge to paint that I had when I first went to school. So that's sort of me putting her on her head, trying to figure out what in the heck I'm doing. So that's 17860.
Oh, that's wonderful. It really is autobiographical. That's fantastic. And last but not least, we have Like Magic. And I am very fond of this. Also because I am a huge fan of mid-century modernism. That is my entire home decor. And I really like the blatant retro aspects of this. And I think this is a good point in time too, before we talk about the piece per se, to talk about your mid-century modern aesthetic. And you had mentioned to me that you had people actively pursuing you to complement their homes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I've been surprised the number of commissions that I've been approached to do with which people that have mid-century homes, and they've completely furnished it, but then they would like a piece of contemporary art, something their own, that they can have in their home. And the way I approach any commission is, I paint things that I want to paint. And we sit down and we talk, and they tell me what they like and what they don't like. And if it's their kids and cats and rainbows, I'm like, we're done. I can't do it. But if it's 67 Mustangs and mid-century colors and, typography and, and these sorts of things, I'm like, well, we can work with that. So I think people see the nostalgic images that I use, and it instantly takes them back to that childhood or even pre-childhood. In a lot of cases, a lot of the commissions have been for folks that are younger than me, but I think they're trying to attach themselves to a simpler time and simpler imagery. I think that's why they sort of vibe off of these images.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So when we look at this piece closely, as I said, the line drawing imagery will come back. Here we go. You've kept this in some way or another entirely through the whole process that we've seen. But I really think it's lovely in this one that that's pretty much all there is. To me, it's very striking because it's a little more simple.
Yeah, and I think it was a direction that I was going, and I think it's something we'll talk about a little bit. In that, if you remember the 17860 piece with the happy drinking guy.
Yeah, I'll take it back. Hold on just a second. There we go.
Yeah, I had stumbled across a vast collection of like old matchbook covers. They were basically where you could order matchbooks for your bar or restaurant, and then you could pick your imagery. And so I had all of these line drawings, and I was just like, well, how do I use them? And I used it here the first time. And then I thought, maybe what if I simplified it? What if I didn't have all of the type and all the typography? And in a small sketchbook, I started doing sketches that's similar, to the work on paper that you had. And I filled up a half a sketchbook with these sorts of images. And then this was, let's take it up. Let's do my process. Let's go and let's do a work on paper. And let's see how it works on a larger scale. And then we can take it and we can go on, from that point up to the full scale, works. This painting is kind of interesting because, again, it's one of those where I think people come to my work, they have a suitcase with them, and they have a suitcase of their own emotions, their own ideas of what things say and what they mean. And some people can look at this, and I've had people mention it to me before, that it's about female exploitation. There's the woman laying herself out. Could be in some distress there. She'd be sawed in half, for Christ's sake. And then there's the guy taking photos away from it and everything. I approached it from a change in painting that I was going through, in that I was a photorealistic painter when I first started exploring it again. I wanted to show you that I could paint, and I thought there's no better way to do it. And it's what I was doing in college also. So it was an easy way for me to get back out. And then when I started finding these images and started doing a looser painting style, I mean, this is as far away from photorealism as you can get. And so this was like magic to me. It sort of opened up this path, this avenue that I've followed now for 25 years.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to stop sharing right now and go back to us. One of the things that I wanted to ask you too, and I've asked pretty much every artist in this series, I know we're all sick of talking about COVID, but I think it's really interesting when you talk to various artists, their individual process of experiencing it. How did you experience it? Were you highly productive? Did you sort of close in on yourself? What happened for you?
It's strange for me because I basically have two careers. You know, I was a visual journalist in the newspaper industry for 30 years. I'm currently a graphic designer in a county government, but then I have my studio. And so dividing those two, you know, you work a 40-hour week and then you go in the studio and you can do whatever you want. But you have, you know, the time commuting, you have the time doing this. So I was very set on a schedule. COVID happens and I'm working from home. The studio is here in the home. So as soon as I push that button at 5 o'clock to be done for the day, there's no hour-and-a-half commute home. I'm out in the studio. So all of a sudden there became this extra creative time, you know, I could go out on a lunch hour and if nothing else, just sit there and look at a painting and think about what I might do, where before it was sort of like I had the process going. Now let's keep the ball rolling because I don't have time. I don't have time. So what I found is that I had time to be more reflective about my process, which is kind of different because when I first thought about it, it's like, man, I'm going to crank this stuff out now. It's like, I'm going to show my wife how productive I can be. I'm just going to go full speed ahead. And I actually slowed production because it gave me time to be more reflective and think about the imagery that I was using and be more selective in some of the paintings that I'm working on, which has really been helpful in this field guide series, because over the course of 25 years, I've got a lot of material. I've got a lot of reference and I'm wanting to use it all, but I'm sort of like, what meant the most to me during this process, and now what do I do? So there's a lot of reference and researching and digging through materials where before I wouldn't have had that leisure. So to answer your question bluntly, my production is slowed, but my creative thought process has gained, you know, has increased.
Okay, so you paint pretty much every single day?
Yes, yes.
That's wonderful.
And that's the nice thing about having the studio in the home. I had a studio outside and, you know, you kind of got off work and it was like, yeah, I don't want to drive and go do that. And then you get kicked out at a certain time, you know, it was like, it just wasn't conducive. And it was funny when my wife and I found this house 23 years ago. It was built in 1946 as the model home for our subdivision. So it had a 2.5 car garage with a vaulted ceiling. And as soon as we walked in, my wife said, "We'll never park a car in here, will we?" And I was like, no, this is a studio and it's where I've worked ever since.
That's terrific. So I would like to speak to you about this lovely piece that you have over your left shoulder. Can we talk about this?
I thought this might be interesting to look, because as I think, and I work through this field guide series, which I have a feeling is an into a chapter where I'm going to work through some of the ideas that I've been working with and kind of bring them to a conclusion. In the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, what's next? And as I look back at some of my paintings, I really started enjoying some of the abstract passages in them. And I thought, well, why not move forward with that? So this is a work on paper. This is a larger work on paper. This is larger than the 22 by 30, but it's a series that I'm roughly calling right now Popstraction. It's an idea of pop art, but painted abstractly. So it has, you know, some op art image in it. It has some abstract expressionist packages in it. It has some of the graffiti, you know, images that I've been using before. But then again, it still has that little nostalgic factor of like, why is that guy in there? And why is he screaming? You know, so I never can see myself being a fully abstract painter. I don't get it, but I find myself wanting to make those a bigger part of the process that I'm doing in creating my work. So this is possibility. This is sort of what I'm doing when I step away from the easel.
That's great. That's exciting. It'll be really fun to watch how this manifests. And I'm going to ask the audience too, if you have any questions that you would like to ask David, please put them in the chat, because we will answer as many questions as we can get to. So if we didn't cover something, or if there's something you wanted to know more about, if you would please just type your question in there, and then we will ask him and you'll know the answer. So we'd love to find out about that. Now, another question that I commonly ask all the artists in this series, David, is, since we are a proud campus of the College of Central Florida, we do have students and emerging artists that are, you know, that come to the museum and that take classes at CF. What advice or what tips or tricks would you like to pass on to either just beginning artists or people who are, you know, wanting to make this their potential career someday?
I would say, don't be afraid to experiment. As I mentioned, once I first got back into painting and wanted to pursue it stronger, I fell back on photorealism, and I was doing these paintings, but it still, I wasn't quite happy with that. And I was lucky enough to take an experimental class with a great painter and instructor down at Eckerd College, or Ringling College, Leslie Lerner. And he was giving a 3-day workshop on experimental painting. And I thought, well, this would be great. I'll be forced to do something that I don't normally do. And it was a great 3-day workshop. I learned a lot, but he and I sort of struck up a little bit of you know, an accord. And after the end, I kind of sheepishly took up a slide sheet, back when you used to have, we would work on slides. And I said, you know, Leslie, would you look at these? And he sort of looked, I wouldn't picture you for a realist, but yeah. And I said, what can I do going forward? He said, I bet you have a square inch of every painting you've done where you think that's the best square inch of any painting anywhere. The light's hitting the raindrop just right, or that little flake of, you know, rust on that neon sign is just, the shadow's just perfect. And I was like, yeah, you're right. I can do that. He said, I challenge you to go home and take the last painting you did and take a paintbrush, dip it in white paint, and just put it on your canvas and paint over that 1 inch that you love so much. And I did. I went home that night, had a couple of bourbons as I looked at this painting I just finished, and I went and got a 4-inch brush and I dipped it down to some house painter's paint, fully charged, and I just put it on the canvas, brushed it down, and just stepped back and instantly regretted what I had done. I thought, how am I going to clean this up? I would grab, you know, the palette knives and rags, and I was ready to do it, but then all of a sudden it started dripping. And I was just like, I can paint something there. That's like, I've created a window into this painting that was finished that I can now go back into and work again. And that was sort of that experimenting with that's led me to experiment the rest of my life. I'm not afraid to paint over something I can paint it again. I mean, it's not, I painted it once, I can paint it again. It's don't have that fear of things being precious. Don't be afraid to destroy them, to create something new, and just go for it. Leslie was, probably he gave me probably one of the greatest gifts of my life.
Well, that's very brave. That's extremely brave. Because even as you're telling the story, my heart's kind of fluttering.
I did say I had a couple of bourbons before that, so I was to kind of edge the heart a little bit. So
we do have a question from Emily. She asks, how do you handle running into a creative block while painting?
You know what? I mean, I have been lucky enough not to have come to a complete stop. Now, I might come to a crossroads where I'm thinking, should I go forward with this? What am I doing? I'm a loser. It's like, I'm going to get back into being a musician. I'm just giving this artwork up. But what I'll do is that's where the works in paper come in. Because it's paper, it's not precious. It's not a $400 canvas or something. It's a $3.98 piece of paper. And it'll be just like, what do you want to paint today? It doesn't have to be precious, and it can be a few brush strokes, but it's that idea of just keep going and not to dwell on the thing that's got you blocked. And even if it's not painting, I mean, if you are a painter and you're at a block, it's like a writer friend of mine would say, what they would do is just say, okay, I'm just not going to write right now. I'm going to ride my bike. And every day, I'd have this writing period. I'm just not going to think about riding. I'm going to think about riding my bike and not getting hit by a car today. So it's something to take your mind away. To me, it's always been doing something different painting wise. So.
Okay. We have another question. Aiden asks, do you have any tips for the mediums you use or have used?
Well, I mean, I was trained in oil, and in college, it became more economical to work in acrylic. When I started painting again, it was sort of like oil had that panache about it. It seemed to be more artsy. So I got back into oil, but working in an unair conditioned studio in August in Florida and having a face full of fumes and linseed oil and turpentine come up in you, it wasn't conducive to what I wanted to be doing. So I switched back to acrylic, but what I started doing was taking some of the thought process behind the technique of oil painting and doing that in acrylic with a lot of glazes, a lot of washes, and a lot of those things. Acrylic will never be oil painting, but it allowed me to continue to do some of the effects that I enjoyed so much in oil.
Okay, that makes sense. I've got kind of one for you that's it can go as deep as you would like it to. What does art mean to you? I guess I should say, what does your art mean to you?
It means everything to me. It's a way for me to articulate my existence, what I'm doing. Some people have Facebook, they're on Facebook and it's like, I'm going shopping and I'm doing this, or I'm going on vacation and I'm doing this. It's like I have these ideas mentally, and a lot of times it's funny, I kind of know my archive, I know my images, and a lot of times it's like just before I fall asleep, I'll start putting these images together. And so it's such an ingrained part of me now that I can't see not doing it. I can't see what would possibly replace it. So
that's wonderful. Well, it looks like you and I covered the bases extraordinarily well, because I just don't see any more questions coming up. Is there anything else you would like to mention, or any tidbits you want to share before we maybe call it an evening?
Well, I'm probably talking to the choir here, but I would tell everybody to get out and enjoy any kind of art, that they can lay their hands on, visual, performing, anything, especially after the past year and a half that we've had where we haven't been able to enjoy it. And I would also say, try to support your local artists. I mean, they're here, they're working, and they live here because they love the area that they're from. So I've had so many friends that have left the area because they just didn't feel supported and they've had to move someplace. So I would say, yeah, support your local artist and enjoy your local art scene. And if you don't think you have much of one, get out and get engaged and make it happen.
Wonderful advice. And to segue, we also encourage everybody to please come to the Appleton Museum of Art. David's 3 wonderful pieces that we looked at in the slideshow are currently on view for you to enjoy. So we'd love for you to come and see those. And I just want to say thank you, David. This has been absolutely delightful. I've admired your pieces, but it's just fun talking to you about it.
Oh, well, thank you very much. It's been my pleasure. And it's been a joy too to see those pieces. It's almost, like there's some children you haven't seen in a while. You've been separated. And so when you sent me the digital images, I was like, that's fun.
The babies, say hi to the babies.
Exactly.
Well, before we sign off this evening, I wanted to, in addition to thank you all for coming, I also wanted to mention that those of you who may be tuning in for the first time, this is an ongoing series. I have a whole big YouTube playlist on the Appleton Museum of Art of previous, because these are being recorded, and it is tonight as well. So you can go back and look at the previous recordings that we've done, and we will have 2 more to round out the series. So we will go through December and then the series will end. The next one is on Thursday, November 18th, and I will be chatting with Juliette Van Otteren, an internationally acclaimed photographer. One of her amazing exhibitions of really fabulous images of horses is currently on view at the Appleton on the 2nd floor. So we encourage you to come see that. It's really looking at horses in a very different way. It's very wonderful. And that will be up until the 24th of April. So please do come down and see that. So again, thank you for coming. Thank you, David. We appreciate you, and come see David's art. It's fantastic.
Yep. Thank you for the opportunity, and hope to see you all at the Appleton soon.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.